I'm Dr. Yvonne Cason, the president of Spiritual Awakenings International. Welcome, everyone, to this very, very wonderful event. I'm absolutely delighted today that we have Rabbi Yoel Glick presenting for us all the way live from Israel. So I'm absolutely delighted. We at Spiritual Awakenings International now have subscribers in 98 countries around the world. We're delighted about how we've grown. Please take a second now and type into the chat where it is you're joining us from today. I am joining you from Toronto, Canada, and I see we've already got some people joining us from the various places in the United States, various places in Canada. So welcome, Ottawa, San Diego, California, Calgary, Alberta. That's fabulous. Chicago, Tel Aviv. Another one from Israel. Isn't that wonderful? Scotland, New Hampshire, England, Bay Area, California. Wow. Welcome everyone from around the world. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Rabbi Yoel Glick, who is a teacher of Jewish mysticism and one of the pioneers of modern Jewish meditation. He was born and raised in Toronto, Canada, then New York in the USA, and later moved to Israel and France. He is the director of Daat Elyon, which is an online academy and in-person center in Jerusalem, Israel, that focuses on personal transformation through meditation, study of mysticism, coaching, and spiritual community. Rabbi Glick is the author of 3 wonderful books: Living the Life of Jewish Meditation, Walking the Path of the Jewish Mystic, and Seeking the Divine Presence. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Rabbi Yoel Glick.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Cason, for your introduction. Thank you all for joining us. So today I would like to share with you the story of my spiritual journey, the experiences that have transformed me and transformed my life, and the insights that have changed the way I see myself and the world. So my father always said that I was a dreamer because I was always in my head. And I was always busy thinking about life, wondering, what are we doing here? Who are we? What are we? And my first spiritually transformative experience occurred between 5 and 7 years old. Not sure exactly when, but I certainly remember what happened. I was sitting wondering about life in this world. And suddenly I thought, we say we're here, but where is here? In fact, where's there? Where's anywhere? And then all of a sudden, everything disappeared. And I was in whole other reality, one of boundless space, timeless, no form. But there was an incredible, powerful, and vital presence that surrounded me. And it filled my whole being and was so beautiful and full of light. And at that moment, I realized at that young age that there's more to life than what we see in this physical plane of consciousness. And later, I learned that that presence is all-powerful and all-pervading. It's what we call God. That presence is always there. Another important event in my life was when my younger brother was born, Jonathan, and he was born with a heart condition. And when he was 6 years old, he was taken to Chicago to a hospital where they did an 8-hour operation, first of its kind on a baby. And my mother was back home in Chicago. My father had flown with my brother. And halfway through the operation, I called her and said, I'm sorry, he's not going to make it. She put down the phone, flung open the windows, began to pray with all her heart. And then she suddenly felt this incredible presence and heard a voice say, it will all be all right. And that is what happened. And after this experience, my mother became more religious. We started to go to synagogue every week. We celebrated Sabbath, the holidays, kept a kosher home, followed the traditional dietary laws. And I was sent to a day school, a Hebrew day school, where I learned half a day Jewish studies and half a day secular studies. And it became a very important part of my life because I went there till I was 15 and I loved the biblical stories and the studies of the Talmudic logic, the arguments and the insights. And I loved going to synagogue because there I felt a presence. It was peaceful, embracing, and alive. But this odd thing about it is it never occurred to me it had anything to do with the rest of life. And so my life went on. And really, for the next 10 years, I lived what we call a normal life. We had family problems, house moves, school changes, visits to other countries. But the real crisis began when I was 16, when our parents called us into their bedroom and told us that my mother was a diabetic, had been one since her teens, took insulin every day, and diabetes was now deeply affecting her health. And we were shocked. We never knew anything about it. And I learned later this explained a lot of her mood swings at times and other problems she had. And then couldn't do nothing but just say, okay, we'll see what happens. But then at 18, I was about to go off to Europe to spend the year in Lausanne, Switzerland. My parents once more took me into our former living room and said, your mother has only 10 years left to live. Do you still want to go to Switzerland? And I was 18 years old, and 10 years seemed a lifetime, and I was very excited with my journey. So off I went to Switzerland nonetheless. And there I began to ask a lot of questions about life and its values. And there I met my wife, Nomi. So it's got a special place in my heart. And that summer I went on a trip to the south of Europe, and that's the Volkswagen you see there. Quite like that we traveled in. And we started through Switzerland, went into Italy, Venice, Florence, Rome, Naples, moved across the Italian Riviera into Monaco, to the south of France, French Riviera. And we were on our way to Cannes when suddenly our car broke down, something it did quite often. And when I got out of the car, suddenly I had a terrible headache. My head began to spin, and then suddenly I was vomiting all over the place. We tried to stop a car to get someone to help us. Finally, a young man on a motorcycle offered to help and take me to hospital. I hopped on board. Peter said he'd get the car going and come to see me, to join me. Got to the hospital, the doctors examined me, say, you've had sunstroke, drink a lot, don't exert yourself, you'll be all right in another day. I started walking down the hallway and I collapsed partway through. Next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed. I spent that time with a fever of 104, where I couldn't open my eyes. The doctors gave me a spinal tap to try and find out what was happening to me. And I just didn't know what was going on. But after a few days, I started to feel better. Head doctor came and said I could go home. It really was just a bad sunstroke. Peter went off to take the car back to Lausanne, and I Said I'd join them in a few days when they released me. But that wasn't what God had in mind. Next day, I felt sicker than ever, spent the next 3 weeks in hospital, 6 spinal taps, series of EEGs, and never really found out what I had. In that time, I would talk to the patients about life, the meaning of existence. In the evenings, I'd sit on the balcony, play my guitar, think about life, look up at the stars in the Mediterranean. And despite everything that was happening, I felt protected, felt there was a presence with me. Everything would be all right. After the 3 weeks, my brother-in-law came, took me. The doctors told him I had a brain tumor. I should get it operated on when I get home. I got back to Toronto, and my father took me to a top neurosurgeon, and he gave me a CAT scan and said there's nothing there. Probably had viral meningitis. We all were very relieved, and I felt a miracle had occurred. But then I discovered that my mother's health had further deteriorated, and now the doctors said she only had 2 years to live. I was stunned. I felt I had nothing to hold on to. Felt like a ship without a rudder. And Lausanne had caused me to ask all kinds of questions about my life, about the way we live, the values we had, fall in love with Nomi, who was a Christian. So suddenly my whole life began to be in crisis. Now, during this time, my favorite uncle, Swul, my father's younger brother, who was a beatnik, totally secular, had started going to synagogue and become a religious conservative Jew. And he was studying and praying, and I started to get interested in what he was doing. Nomi, who happened to move to Toronto and be with her sister, also got involved. And then that December also, in the beginning of that year, my father's younger sister married Shlomo, who was a charismatic rabbi, a Jewish mystic and singer. And I came to the wedding. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. It was 2,500 people. And the teaching was profound and inspiring. The music was sensational. And the prayer and dancing were ecstatic. This was a Judaism I've never seen before. It was hip, meaningful, and powerful. That year, I went back to university in the fall, and I began to ask serious questions about life. I began to have an inner life of prayer and study. Began to dive into Jewish living with both of my uncles. And then that following summer, 1974, I went to Israel for the summer. My uncle Swul and his wife, Dorothy, my aunt Elaine, now called Nila, and my uncle Shlomo. And I met Shlomo's community of followers coming from all kinds of different backgrounds, serious seekers. And I got deeply involved with the community, took on their Orthodox practice, spent long hours in prayer, song, and study. Then 1 week before leaving, I suddenly got a terrible flu. I had a fever, I ached all over. And I just didn't know how I was going to fly home. I got a message from the airline saying my flight had been canceled and I could either go in 2 days or in 2 weeks. Well, the logical thing to do was to stay for the 2 weeks. I was having a great time and I had time to get over the flu. But suddenly, this powerful intuition said, go home now. So I got on the plane despite how I felt and started to fly home. Well, the plane got redirected to New York. So I called home when I got there. My father said, where are you? We've been looking over for you. Come home right away. Your mother is dying. I got home and discovered my mother had been in a coma for 3 days. But when I came in, she sat up, hugged me, and said, welcome home, son. Those were her last words she said. She died 3 days later. It was a terrible tragedy for me. We'd lost the rock of our family. And I turned to my new religious practice for comfort, prayed and spoke to God, followed the traditional morning rituals, led the prayer services in our home, spoke to rabbis and religious leaders who came to the Shiva the week of mourning about God and life, the meaning of our existence. And then 3 days after she passed away, I woke up at night and looked in the corner of my room, and there was my mother standing there, as if she was physically present. But it was clear she was not a person of flesh and blood. She was an ancient ethereal being surrounded by beatific light. And she just looked at me, didn't say a word. But I felt she was telling me, I'm here with you. You're not alone. And later she would appear to me in dreams and in meditations and visions, but in a beautiful, youthful form, with magnificent garments of light in colors I've never seen in this world. But I think she came to me in that particular form that night to tell me I'm not a body, I'm an eternal soul, and I will always be with you. After that, I decided I wanted to become a rabbi. And Nomi went through an Orthodox conversion, became Jewish. We got married. In the following summer, we moved to New York, where I went to study at Yeshiva University with the great Talmudist Joseph Soloveitchik. Nomi enrolled in the Art Students League to follow her studies in fine art. We lived at 76th and West End in Manhattan. Shlomo had a shul at 79th. Each day, my routine was to go up on the IRT for over an hour to Yeshiva University. And during the train ride, I would study Jewish mysticism, Hasidic thought. Then I'd spend 5 hours at the Yeshiva University studying Talmud and Jewish law. And then another hour or so studying the mysticism again on the way home. And I loved it and thrived. It was understanding the underpinnings of Jewish law and the values and ideals of the tradition. And through Shlomo, I learned how to get to the essence of the teaching, and then how to apply modern terminology and sensitivities to those teachings so they could be relevant to people today. It was a time of joyous discovery and great enthusiasm, immersed in this Jewish way of life. And I felt totally transformed. 1981, we moved to Israel, bought an apartment in the old city of Jerusalem, a place alive with both the present and the past. Began teaching to seekers of all sorts, particularly people from my Uncle Shlomo's community, people studying the religious schools or yeshivot in the area. And as I started to teach them, so I hear about problems. The yeshivot were very narrow-minded, closed-minded. Kids sometimes felt they were being brainwashed. And it rose in me a kind of desire to create a new place where people could develop a personal relationship with God, where they could study the mystical teachings of Judaism, where there'd be a modern role for women, where there'd be openness and respect for non-Jews. At the same time, I had started a baby products business called Jolly Jumper. My family had started in Canada or owned in Canada, and I was going to have a branch in Israel. We had a van, we went over around the country selling our products. And the reason I'm telling you about the van is because it plays an important part in an event that happened in my life at that time. In December 1982, it was Hanukkah. And I went to a Hanukkah party at my uncle's community in the countryside. And then on my way home at about midnight, I was coming down the road and approaching a curve in the road. And suddenly a car came speeding towards me at maybe 100 miles an hour on my side of the road. And I knew in a second, I had like 2-3 seconds to either get off the road or have a head-on collision. swerved off the road, but there wasn't really a boundary. There wasn't a bank next to the road. So I lost control of the van, and it started to swerve from side to side. Tried to regain control, but I couldn't, and it flipped over. And suddenly on the other side, it went along the embankment upside down. I said the Shema, the prayer affirming God's oneness, because I thought I was going to die. A few seconds later, the car smashed into a bunch of trees, flipped over again, and then rammed into an earth embankment and came to a stop. First thing I did is check that I had legs, arms, hands, and feet. Whole van was totaled. I couldn't open the door, but the window was broken, so I climbed out through the window. I'm standing there, and a few minutes later, a friend of mine who was at the party sees the van, says, "That guy's a goner," and then, shocked, sees me standing there. He starts his car, gets out, and says, "Let me take you to hospital." He says, "I'm okay. All I have is a bruise on my knee." Once I convinced him it was true, he said, "Okay, let me take you to Jerusalem." I got in the car, he took me home, and we both talked about what had happened, and were both convinced that a miracle had occurred. And that night I was lying in bed, and I said, "Well, where will this miracle take me? Why was I spared? What's going to happen next in my life?" 2 weeks later, I'm walking down my street when a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in over a year leans over the balcony. He says, "Would you like to do a mitzvah? Would you like to do a good deed?" I said, "Sure. Well, what do you want?" He told me what it was. He said, "Well, let me go tell my wife Naomi." Went home, told her, got what I needed, and off we went. Didn't think about it much more. 2 weeks later, I got a phone call saying, I don't know if I ever told, from the same friend, saying, "I don't know if I told you, but I belong to a Jewish meditation group run by a swami that had come to Israel to teach yoga and found herself teaching Jews Jewish meditation and a yogic approach to Jewish texts. And the mitzvah you did was for a friend of hers, and she'd like to meet you. We have an open meeting on Saturday nights at this address. Please come." I said, "Okay, I'll think about it." But the next day, I got 3, 4, 5 different phone calls from different people I knew that turned out were part of this meditation group, all with the same invitation. I finally said, "Okay, I'll come, but I'm just going to listen. I won't ask any questions." Got to the meeting. Door was answered by an ultra-Orthodox couple. She was wearing a wig. He had a hat on. I was a little shocked, but amazed. Wonderful, open people. Walked into the room. The swami was sitting on the couch in her orange robes, and there was about 30-odd people sitting on the floor around her. I sat down among them, and a few minutes later, the evening began. And the swami said, "Are there any questions?" And at that time, nobody had anything to say. Now, I was told that never happened before because, Jews are very curious people and they have a lot to say. And I don't remember it ever happening thereafter, but this one time there were no questions. So the swami started to look around the room, the different people there. She pointed at me and she said, "You, do you have a question?" So I decided to ask her the question I'd been thinking about and asking every rabbi and Hasidic Rebbe and every other spiritual person I could. How do I create a school where people will build a tangible and living relationship with God? For the next 2 hours, she outlined the school, its program, and how to make it happen. And at that moment, I knew I'd found my teacher in this life. So I joined her meditation group. There were 2 meditations a week, followed by Q&A. Swami's teachings were extraordinary and enlightening. She had an incredible sense of humor, but also a formidable presence. She took complex, abstract, Kabbalistic ideas and made them clear, simple, meaningful, and real. She taught profound wisdom that was innovative, inspiring, living truths. For example, she taught that the Kabbalistic tree of life and the yogic body of energy centers are really about the same thing, about centers of energy that exist in a spiritual body underlying our physical frame. And the energies of the divine realms and of the whole cosmic flow into these centers to fill us with their energy and raise our consciousness into the higher realms. And she then explained that the story of the Garden of Eden was really about the tree of life, because as 3 lines of energy that run through that spiritual body, and the middle one is called the path of the Kundalini in yoga. And in Judaism, that's the path of the Shekhinah, the feminine aspect of deity. And she said, if you look at all the prayers, you'll see they talk about the Shekhinah rising up and rising up to the crown to unite with her husband, her spiritual husband, her divine spouse. And this is what was happening in the Garden of Eden. The first humans were created on a higher world that they called the Garden of Eden. They had bodies of light and spoke with God. And they wanted to use the Kundalini energy, the Shekhinah energy, what they called in the East the serpent power, that was the snake, to awaken wisdom, to awaken an awareness and a connection to the universal mind of God in the center of the third eye, wisdom, understanding. But they were not quite ready, evolved enough to achieve that goal. And instead, their consciousness shattered, and they fell back from the higher worlds into physical reality where we live. And our journey in this world is to return to that home with all the wisdom and experience that we have learned along the way. She also talked about the story of Jacob wrestling with the angel, said it was really a spiritual initiation where a great being overshadowed him and poured energies into his being all through the night. And then in the morning, he was blessed and given a new name. But he also was lame from the intensity of the energies flowing into his body for the rest of his life. And later, when I was visiting the swami in her home, northern Israel, I had that experience where I was held on the bed all through the night, immobile, where powerful energies flowed inside me and opened my mind to whole other worlds and awoken the energy in my heart center to new levels. Right. I start to be there. Becomes too much. To new levels of power and consciousness. In fact, my entire inner life was transformed because suddenly in meditation, I would feel the chakras, the sphirot, energy centers, awakening, energy flowing in them, my mind moving into other states of consciousness. Found the Kundalini, the Shekhinah energy rising up through my body, and my consciousness expanding out into new realms of being, traveling to ever more brilliant, beautiful, and blissful light, where I experienced, can't say it any other way, incredible loving presences of dazzling light that enveloped my whole being and consciousness, filled me with their love and their peace. Not only did I feel the energy inside me, I felt the energy flowing all around me. And I felt the energy flowing from other people. Suddenly, I experienced them not just as personalities, but as souls of sparks, living sparks of God. And it changed the whole way I saw people, saw the world, and interacted with them. And this was the deeper level of spiritual experience in life I've been searching for. And I knew I'd found the teacher I've been waiting for my whole life. Finally, next year, I started Chokhmat Lev, the wisdom of the heart, a spiritual center in the old city, a Jewish yeshiva of a different kind, where we taught the traditional studies, but also mystical teachings. Women were teachers. We had teachers from all different directions, wonderful collection of people from different backgrounds. And people came from all over the world to study at the school. And I also taught the teachers Jewish meditation to a small group of seekers several times a week. And this point in my life, as I started this school, suddenly my teaching went to a whole other level. I was inspired, innovative ideas flowed into my mind, wisdom flooded my being, inner context grew and broadened, inner guidance guided my steps. One day during this period, I had a vision of a great pillar of light rising up from Jerusalem into the heavens to join with a vast network of light, energy, and consciousness to span all of the worlds. And as I entered the beauty, splendor, and power of this celestial temple, the realization came to me that we were building this supernal structure through our efforts in meditation and prayer. And everyone who dedicated themselves to this endeavor was part of our spiritual community. In 1988, my teacher invited me and two of her close students for a meeting in her apartment. We sat down, she said to us, "I'm leaving Israel. I won't be coming back. I'm going to retire in the south of France to follow my inner work in a solitary existence." I couldn't think of a life without her, so I blurted out, "Is there room for a family?" She closed her eyes and thought for a few minutes, and then she said, "Yes." So the following December, I took my wife, Nomi, my son, Adir, who was 7, my youngest son, Nevonel, who was 2, and we moved from Jerusalem to a small village in the mountains of southern France. The mountain you see behind you, Mount Canigou. And there we lived a contemplative life. And we gathered a small group of my teachers, students from Israel, North America, England, and other countries, and began to learn about other religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Sikhism, Islam. She urged us to learn about the other religions, but also to stay true to our own faith. And so we studied the different texts. We learned about the different teachers, the saints, and spiritual masters. And we had various experiences in other communities. At the end of that first year, I had my first unexpected meeting with a Christian monastic community. Happened to be Friday night. And, we don't travel on the Sabbath, partly where we started when we did. And this was Friday night, and my son had been in music school a year, and they were giving out the diplomas. And it started at 7. Sabbath came in about 9:45, so I wasn't worried. 7, 8, 8:30, we haven't even started yet. I'm getting nervous. Someone puts their hand over my shoulder, taps my phone and says, "It's almost Shabbos. What are you doing here?" I look up and I see a monk in full habit. He looks at me and sees my somewhat astonished face, says, "Don't worry, if you're living a Jewish religious life, I have nothing to teach you." It changed the whole way I feel. We started to talk. He told me he had a community, lived up in a monastery 1,000 meters up. "Come and visit," he said. I said, okay, tucked it away. But life continued on. I didn't get there. Till a year later, a couple of friends came. We were looking for a nice walk, and it was considered one of the most beautiful walks in the area. And we said, okay, let's go. Let's see what's happening. We went up, climbed up. It was like walking through Chinese paintings. It was magnificent. And we got to the monastery, which is originally from the 10th century, and walk into their bookstore. And we hear this beautiful music. And my friend goes over, who's a great fan of music, one of his real hobbies and interests. And he says, "What's that music?" He says, "It's our band playing Israeli music." He says, "Oh, I'm from Jerusalem." And she says, "Oh, I always wanted to go to Yerushalayim," which is the Hebrew name for Jerusalem. I look at her book that she's reading, and it happens to be a week before Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. And she's reading the Book of Our Heritage, a book about the holidays. I say, what is going on here? And before I can even find out what that might be, I hear someone call out in Hebrew, Shalom Habibi, hi friend, Manishma, how's it going? And I see a priest walking through the door, chatting with me. I discover this story, the community, the founder had been lost and didn't know how to re-find his faith. He was a Christian, and he went to Jerusalem, lived in Meir Sharim, the ultra-Orthodox quarter, went to all of the spiritual teachers, Hasidic rabbis there, loved what was doing, and fell in love with the Jewish life of Jesus. So he incorporated Jewish practices, the Sabbath, the holidays, study, and Jewish Israeli folk dancing into the practice of the community. And they were so excited to meet a rabbi, they wanted me to come and teach them about Judaism. So I started to go there regularly. And of course, at the same time, they taught me about Christianity, of which I really was ignorant, because as a Jew growing up, you read about the persecutions and you read about the attempts to convert Jews. And it was very clear there was tremendous respect for Judaism here. They had no interest in converting me. They wanted to know more about Judaism. So I learned about the power and the beauty of Christianity in my time with them, which has continued over the years, and other communities as well. And I also in 1992 went to India with my teacher. We went to the south, to the ashram of Sai Baba, and spent some time there, met many seekers, and had some incredible experiences. And then we went up north to Rishikesh, to her home ashram, the Shivananda ashram, the Divine Life Society, and I met her guru by her brother in the guru, Swami Chidananda, one of the great saints of India. It was a great blessing and privilege to spend time with that great soul. And as I learned with these different teachers, I began spent time in ashrams. The odd thing was that what it did for me is it brought the Bible and the prophets to life for me, because a yeshiva didn't remind me of the prophets very much or of the life of the patriarchs, but the ashrams did. And the spiritual masters I met and the experiences they had reminded me of the prophets. And the more I learned about the path and the journey, the more I understood the Bible was about the spiritual journeys of the great biblical figures. And also as I visited their holy places of Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Sikh, and felt the divine presence there, I knew God was in all religions. And I knew that wherever I felt the divine presence, I felt at home. In fact, I understood that wherever God is home. Then in February 1996, my wife and I moved to Calcutta for a period of time in India so that I could work in an outdoor pediatric clinic as a medic, spend time in her holy places. I want to give back something to the country from which I had received so much. I was uplifted by the work I did with the poor, found it very meaningful. We went to visit various holy sites, Belur Mat, the headquarters of the Ramakrishna Order in Calcutta, and Rumtik Monastery, the headquarters of the Buddhist teacher, the Karmapa in Sikkim, were two special highlights of our time there. And after 6 months in the country, we decided to return to France to be with our teacher. And then 3 months later, she passed away. And her death was a profound and heart-wrenching loss for us. Felt rudderless and empty. I was afraid I was abandoned without a guide. But I need not have worried, because her presence and influence were still with me. Her presence has continued with me without interruption ever since that time. In fact, she's more present than ever. I've had profound experiences, extraordinary guidance, and incredible insights I've received through her over the years. 2004, I went to visit Israel, and one of the people that had been part of her meditation group asked me to start teaching the meditation again. So I committed myself to come 3 months a year, month at a time, to lead the group. And I started coming, and we collected seekers. She had an extra room in her apartment where I could teach. And after the meditation, people wanted to hear some teaching, so I started to teach from what I'd learned. And as I started to teach, I decided to go back to the Jewish sources, looking for the inspired kinds of teachings I'd received and seen in other religions. And I discovered that same ideas were present in Jewish teaching, only in different language. And that really what I was looking for is those teachings that awoke a living truth that came from inner experience and not from book learning. And I focused on finding these living truths in the teachings of Judaism and in creating a path for Jewish seekers based on meditation and prayer, the study of Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, and the work of personal transformation. So in 2005, I returned to teaching publicly, both in Israel and North America. I wrote 3 books, started doing book tours and meditation retreats. People received new understandings, insights, and experiences, and a new vision of the purpose of life in this world. And I discovered I had a special gift for helping emotionally destabilized individuals and those who'd gone off into the lower psychic phenomena and lost their mental balance. Discovered that my presence, teaching, and practices helped them to restore their balance and find healing and wholeness. 2017, we returned to the Holy Land, opened Daat Elyon, the Center for Higher Knowledge and Consciousness, taught experiential meditation several times a week, had classes, spiritual wisdom and personal transformation, and held monthly meditation retreats. People came from all backgrounds. Mostly they were Jewish, but we also had seekers from other faiths. Then COVID came, and we had to shut everything down and switch online. And I heard of so many people, the struggle with the health crisis, their fears, the sense of isolation. I wanted to do something to help, so I started doing daily online meditations. And what was amazing to me, that the energy was carried and felt by people online through the medium of the internet. And people started to turn up from all over the world. It really was a worldwide web we created. And the meditations eventually led to people asking questions. So we had a Q&A part of the meetings. Eventually, there were so many questions, started teaching weekly webinars, spiritual wisdom, meditation, and the life of personal transformation. During the 4 years of classes, I built a curriculum for the path I'd always wanted to create, based on meditation and contemplative prayer, personal transformation, and spiritual wisdom. Also begun practice of one-on-one guidance, and developed a spiritual community of seekers. And over the last year, we built a new website where people can become part of that community and have access to curriculum. We have a wonderful group of eclectic people from many different backgrounds, both Jewish and other religions, even no religion. Unites us as our search for truth and meaning, tangible experience of the divine, looking for others who are on the same journey. And then came October 7th, shatter my country, challenge my people, bring sorrow and suffering to all of us. The terrible atrocities that occurred on that day, the total hatred, the unspeakable cruelty, challenged my belief that we and the Palestinians would ever learn to live together in peace. The widespread and incomprehensible anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism around the world has made me and many other Jews wonder if we'll ever really find a place among the nations. And the suffering of both Israelis and Palestinians that has arisen from the war, that has continued until today, source of profound sorrow and heartbreak for me and everyone I know. But I have not given up. I have not lost hope, and I have not abandoned my work and belief. If anything, it is more important than ever. As a spiritual being, as a rabbi and teacher, October 7th is part of a battle between light and darkness that is taking place all around the world. And my task in that battle is to be a light giver, to try and bring light into the world in any way I can, to bring compassion, justice, love, and peace to every circumstance I face, to labor to combat the darkness wherever I find it. That's what I try to do every day. With everything that's going on in the world, all the conflicts and struggles in the Middle East, war between Russia and the Ukraine, divisions in America, Canada, and most of Europe, terrible problems over Africa and Asia, not to mention the dangers and consequences for the whole planet of climate change. It's a real challenge to retain a positive vision of hope for the future. We're all being put to the test. During this time, I found a refuge in 5 practices. One is faith in divine life force that is at the heart of creation. That is more powerful than anything else. Nothing can ultimately stand in its way. Second is steadiness in my practice. To keep going and doing my meditation, my prayer, all my works of service, no matter what's happening. My search for wisdom and truth. Third is to connect to who I really am, to keep going back to that place at the core of my being, where I know I'm not this body, but an eternal soul, a spark of the divine. Connect to God, the higher power, the source of all life. The soul of Israel, the collective soul of all of humankind. To connect to my people and to all peoples around the globe. And I believe that we all apply these 5 practices in our lives will get us through this global storm. On these practices will empower each of us to be effective and useful divine instruments to bring light, love, compassion, and peace into our world. My life has been a journey into worlds of ever greater light, many challenges and difficulties along the way. But they've always pushed me onward to seek deeper understanding and insight. They've catapulted me further into the beauty and power of the higher realms. Received abundant blessings and spiritual gifts in my life, which I am very grateful. Grateful for everything I've learned and received during my journey. Now I want to give these gifts to others, share them whatever way I am able. So come and join us at Daat Elyon, Center for Higher Knowledge and Consciousness. We have twice weekly meditations, live weekly courses that you can join, recorded courses to follow at home, one-on-one guidance that is available to everyone, community events, book clubs, seasonal celebrations, online and in-person retreats. Love to have you with us. Lastly, next month, I'll teach a course that expands on these 5 practices for weathering the storm of our times. I invite you all to participate in this journey with me. We strive to bring light into the darkness, to illuminate this physical reality, the energy and consciousness of the higher realms. These are the journeys of my life. So much more I could share with you. They have given me strength all through my life. I hope they have also given you strength and inspiration in yours. Guess I'm finished a little earlier than I expected, but thank you, everyone. I'm now ready for any questions. And I've always thought questions are the best way to share.
Awesome. Thank you, Rabbi Glick, for an absolutely profound and inspirational presentation. I'm now going to invite Dr. Brian Sackett, who is a board member of Spiritual Awakenings International, who will be moderating your question and answer period. So Brian, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Rabbi Glick. It was both inspiring and uplifting, but very grounded and comforting. So thank you. So if you have questions, you can type them into the chat. I will ask those four people. I have a couple questions of my own to start with. So it sounds like from your talk that the universal teachings, what Aldous Huxley called the perennial wisdom, the wisdom across many different spiritual and religious traditions, was very important to you. So could you tell us more about how that affected you, those teachings, that approach?
Well, the thing is that, I grew up, though I grew up in a house that was, we had lots of contacts with non-Jewish people, but I really never learned anything except about Judaism. And part of my journey reached a certain kind of barrier, blockage, because I felt I couldn't go farther with what was offered to me in Judaism. Become a rabbi. I was teaching in a center, even teaching Jewish mysticism. But there were levels of going deeply into the experience of God, into the nature of reality, into other states of consciousness that just weren't on the curriculum, and that I myself had not really accessed in a way that I felt I could give over to others in fullness and with a sense of living truth. And it was that point when I accidentally, even though there's no accidents in life, part of God's guiding hand through my whole journey, which I saw more and more as I went along, that I was invited to meet this swami for whom I'd done a favor. And that transformed my life because, as I indicate, oddly enough, even though I talked about this kind of center with all kinds of Jewish teachers and leaders, and I knew many of the greats, and she told me exactly how to set up that place. And I've been working on it ever since, in various forms and ever evolving manifestations. And I found that one of the things, there's a famous parable of blind people that meet an elephant. And people ask them, what's it like? One says, oh, it's like this long hose, which they have the trunk. Another says it's like a tree because they got the foot. And the other says, no, it's like a fan because they got the tail. And the other says, no, it's like a wall because they saw the body. And that's a parable for the nature of God and the divine wisdom. But none of us can contain all of it. I think each religion has a part to offer and to add. And the collective wisdom and knowledge can give us that fuller picture. And that's what I discovered. And the most amazing thing to me is what I said afterwards. I went back to the Jewish sources. I discovered that Ramakrishna illuminated the Baal Shem Tov, and that they spoke the same language. In fact, there's one teaching where they're both talking about how keeping your mind in God. And the Ramakrishna says a maidservant is living in the home of her master, and all the time she's taking care of the children, even says, this is my Rama, this is my Krishna. But all the time her mind is really on her children back home. That's how you should live in the world, with your mind always on God. The Baal Shem Tov says, a merchant, because that's what the Jews were doing in his lifetime. They are merchants going from town to town. So a merchant leaves home and goes from town to town. But wherever he's going, all he's thinking about is, when am I going to get home? When am I going to get home? Says that's how we should live in the world. Doing what we do, but keeping one part of our mind in God. So I found that teaching both affirmed my Jewish and enlightened my Jewish tradition and teachings, and also expanded my way of seeing reality, and showed me how beautiful all the religions of the world are.
Thank you, Rabbi Glick. Do you find any conflicts between embracing this universal wisdom and mysticism with the practical aspects of being a rabbi?
I think it's actually a more profound even issue than that. I think that one of the challenges in the world now is, are we universal or are we particular? Do we belong to a particular religion or path, or do we belong to all paths? And actually, I think that whole conversation has got it wrong. It's old-fashioned. Today, it's unity and diversity is the path, which means we have our particular path, but we open, love, and appreciate the wisdom of all traditions. And that tension is always there, but it's a beautiful tension that continually makes me go back and connect to my identity as a Jew and as a rabbi, and at the same time move out to experience and share and learn from all the other religions of the world. And all the religious teachers have many friends from other traditions, and I love them deeply and receive a lot from those connections. And I think it's that spiritual connectedness, that spiritual sharing, that experiencing of the beauty of other religions, the presence of God in other holy places, and the sanctity and wisdom of the teachers and spiritual masters and saints of other religions is the path that will help us to actually learn to live in peace. Because it's only when we can relate to each other on that level of the soul instead of the personality that we, from that place of oneness, which one can actually experience, that we'll ever find a way to bring peace to our earth.
Thank you. That's very profound. JC would like to know, what advice would you give a theology student going into biblical and grief counseling?
I would suggest they learn, certainly, first of all, learn from Judaism and its thousands of years of biblical study and commentaries, but also from all other religions. Learn from the way other people look at the spiritual life. Be open to spiritual friendships from other religions. Seek them out. Seek out interfaith opportunities. Learn to have humility about our own path. To know there's many ways up the mountain. We might love our path the most, but loving other paths takes nothing away from that. I get tired of hearing people say, yes, all paths are wonderful, but mine is the best. That's not real interfaith sharing. Real interfaith sharing is when you say, I see this viewed many ways to the one God, but I found my home and my path. And in terms of the counseling, work with people from the place where they are and speak to the struggles that they have. Well, they're all at different points in the journey, and we all have different ways of seeing the world, and God talks to us all in a language that's appropriate for our own personal life and journey.
Thank you. Tim would like to know, he says, I've noticed that many Jewish seekers have followed yogic practices and teachings. Do you think there's something very special about yoga?
I do. I think, Hinduism and Judaism are the mother religions. They go back a long way. And oddly, they have a lot of similarities. And of course, the connections then follow through to all the religions that have come out of them in different ways. And Jewish seekers, I think, ended up going to yogic path for the same reason that swami interested me, because it made God real and alive. It made, like the teachings, when I first learned the teaching, I learned them for years about Kabbalah of the Sefirot, the body of centers in the tree of life, or in the body of the celestial human being. And they were philosophical ideas. You balance this with that and all kinds of things, celestial spheres. Never quite understood what they were about. I could do all kinds of things with them. It's only when I understood them as a living reality and experienced that inner reality that they became a powerful part of my life, and that I felt I could really teach them from a whole other place of consciousness. Yeah, Elon's a dear friend of mine. I don't know exactly why.
Thank you.
So that's why Jews went to yoga. And I think one of the things is Jews are bringing the yoga back to Judaism. And I believe something my teacher suggested, and that I believe is very much true, that the prophets meditated. The great Jewish rabbi and mystic Aryeh Kaplan wrote a book about meditation in the Bible. And his insight was that that's how they had their prophetic experiences. And I think their meditation was on the body of spiritual centers and awakening the energy and raising the Kundalini or Shekhinah energy until they had these inner experiences that brought them into union with the divine, which then allowed them to see through the mind of God, see reality from the divine point of view, and bring that vision back into the world. That it empowered them to be able to heal, create other miracles, and to have an authority and power to their words. So I think that yoga, so to speak, was Judaism in many ways. But, we talk about that when the temple was destroyed, the Shekhinah, the feminine, the divine presence, went into exile. And what I think that means is that our tangible experience of the divine, we lost the ability to know how to access it. And God became something abstract and unreal. And we lost also the science of God knowledge, which Judaism or Hinduism kept through those thousands of years, has now provided us a gateway back into our own tradition.
Really
Someone
interesting. Thank
had
you.
a beautiful necklace that they lost. Someone else found it, and generations later gives it back to their children.
Great, thank you. Dana would like to know, have you compared growing knowledge of quantum physics with your understanding of mystical religious experiences?
Yes, I have, but that's several other sessions to go to. But yes, science, I haven't talked much about it here, but I have a great love of science, particularly physics, quantum physics, you know, all kinds of changes in the knowledge about consciousness that we understand now. These are all incredibly important parts, I think, of the spiritual life and the development of our spiritual consciousness in the future. And to lead us to a place where science and religion or spiritual experience meet. And that will be a great awakening that it will bring to us all. Quantum physics tells us that, reality isn't what we think it is, and that consciousness affects that reality. We create the reality. Essence of Vedic teaching and really Kabbalistic teaching.
Thank you. Alicia said, how can Jews bring healing to the collective Jewish soul after October 7th?
It's a good question. I think that first of all, I think we begin with those 5 practices, because first we have bring healing to ourselves. The Baal Shem Tov used to say that before we start redeeming the world, we have to redeem ourselves. Before we bring healing to the world, we have to heal ourselves. And I think that we do that, and then that we will be able to do it also for the Jewish soul, is by all the things I said, by learning to hold on to faith, to hold on to that power that's behind all of existence, and know whatever setbacks might happen, nothing can get in that way, and to feel that faith in the core of our being. And the way you do that is by inner experience. When you experience that power in meditation and that incredible presence that is like nothing else and can't really be described, then you know whatever might happen, it'll be all right. That power will finally overcome. And so we need to build our inner practice through prayer and meditation so that we can have faith. That's interesting. In Kabbalah, there's the lower faith and the higher faith. The bottom of the Sefirot is the lower faith. The higher of the Sefirot in the head center, called understanding, is the higher faith. And it's a faith that comes with experience and understanding. And that's the faith we need to have today. And that faith comes from inner experience. And it's really at the core of being able to heal the Jewish soul, because we have to take us to a new level of faith and connection, both to our Jewishness, to the soul of Israel, and to the divine. And of course, also through connecting to the core of who we are, all those 5 things I said, if you can touch that place in your being where you know you're part of oneness of all being, that infuses one with hope. And we have to be steady. We have to work every day to strengthen that place. And you can do little acts of healing every day. Little acts of healing is saying a good word to someone you see in distress, being with a friend, praying for people, just sending energy people's way, praying for light to come wherever there's darkness, love to enter wherever there's hatred, hostility, and send healing to wherever there's sickness or injury to body, mind, and soul. Those are some ways. There's a lot more to be said, but I think that these are ways that are help. And to have faith that what's happened is, once again, the Jewish people have gone through so much over 2,000 years, and yet we're still here. And I think each time we go deeper, each time we're forced to find a new connection, a new way of seeing ourselves, a new path forward. And part of this is certainly about the connection between Israel and the rest of the world. That's partially what makes this time most difficult. But sometimes when there's something wrong in the body, it has to come to the surface, so it be cleared away. And I'm praying that is what this is all about. An opening into a new way forward for all of us.
Well, thank you. You're being in the presence of your wisdom and your love is quite a blessing, and I really appreciate it. So I think we're reaching the end of our time for questions, so I'll turn it back to Yvonne.
All right.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Glick, for an absolutely inspiring, moving, sharing both of your own spiritual awakening journey and also your incredible multi-faith wisdom at this time of great challenge for the world and particularly for the Jewish community. So thank you tremendously.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to everyone today.
Thank you.
Means a lot to me.
Thank you.